The girl stepped into the small cafe quietly, almost as if she hoped no one would hear the door open. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows and carried the cold through the narrow streets, but she tried to pretend she didn't feel it. Her clothes were thin, and the sleeves of her old jacket were frayed, but she held them close around herself as she walked farther inside. The cafe was warm and filled with the soft hum of conversation. People sat with cups of hot chocolate, small pastries, and warm bowls of soup. The smell of baked bread floated through the air, and she felt her stomach tighten painfully. She hadn't eaten since the day before, and the smell made her feel dizzy for a moment. She stood near the entrance, unsure if she should go farther. The floor creaked when she took a careful step. No one paid attention to her at first. She didn't look like the kind of person who usually came in here. The cafe was small, but people from the neighborhood liked it because it felt cozy and familiar. Most of the customers were regulars. She looked around slowly, her eyes stopping when she noticed an old piano pushed into the corner of the room. Its wooden surface was scratched, and a thin layer of dust covered the top. It didn't look like anyone had used it in a long time. A little sign above it said, "For customers only," but the writing had faded. She took a deep breath, gathering courage. She wasn't sure how people would react, but she needed to try. Her stomach hurt too much for her to walk back out into the cold. She knew she couldn't buy anything. She didn't have any coins in her pockets. But maybe, just maybe, she could offer something else. She stepped toward the counter where the owner was wiping down a tray. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes but a kind face. The girl waited until he looked up. When he did, his eyebrows rose slightly, surprised to see a small, thin figure standing there. She swallowed, her throat dry. She had practiced the sentence in her head on the way there, but speaking it out loud felt harder. "Excuse me," she said softly. The owner leaned forward a bit so he could hear her better. "Yes, can I help you?" The girl hesitated. She could feel her hands shaking. A few customers nearby turned their heads curiously. The girl lowered her eyes, then lifted them again with as much courage as she could gather. "Can I play your piano?" she asked. "Just for a piece of food." She said it plainly, without drama, without begging. It was simply the truth. For a moment, nothing happened. The owner blinked, not sure he heard her correctly. Someone seated at a nearby table let out a small laugh. Another person glanced at the girl and then looked back at their phone. The girl felt heat rush to her face, but she stayed where she was. She didn't look away this time. She knew if she did, she would lose her courage. The owner looked toward the old piano, then back at the girl. His face was unreadable. It was clear he didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to hearing such a request. A couple sitting near the window whispered to each other while looking at her. She could hear parts of their conversation. "Is she serious?" One said. "She probably doesn't even know how to play." The other replied quietly. The girl heard the soft laughter coming from another table. Her chest tightened, but she kept her expression calm. She had faced worse than laughter. The owner finally let out a slow breath. "You want to play the piano? For food?" He asked again, as if making sure he understood. She nodded quickly. "Yes, just something small. Anything you can give." Her voice was gentle but steady. She didn't try to look pitiful. She only wanted to be honest. The owner rubbed the back of his neck. He wasn't unkind, but he was unsure. The cafe wasn't busy enough that day for him to easily give away food, and he didn't want customers complaining. But at the same time, he didn't want to send a hungry child away. "You know how to play?" he asked. "Yes," she said, though she didn't elaborate. Her answer only made some of the customers smile in disbelief. A teenager sitting with a group near the door grinned and whispered, "She's probably going to pound random keys." A few laughed under their breath. The girl heard them, but she didn't react. She didn't step back or show any embarrassment. Instead, she waited patiently for the owner's response. He glanced at the piano again. It hadn't been touched in months. It wasn't even tuned. Allowing her to play wouldn't hurt anything. Finally, he sighed and gave a small shrug. "All right," he said. "Go ahead. If you play, I'll give you something warm to eat." The girl felt a wave of relief wash over her. She nodded gratefully. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. She turned toward the piano. As she walked across the room, the cafe's noise slowly faded. People were watching her now, some out of curiosity, some out of amusement, and some simply because there wasn't much else going on. The girl reached the piano and stood in front of it for a moment. Up close, it looked even older than she first thought. The keys were slightly yellowed. The surface had scratches from years of use. Dust clung to the top in a thin layer. She lifted her hand and brushed the dust away gently, leaving faint streaks. Her fingers trembled, but not from the cold this time. She felt something deeper, something familiar, something like coming home. She slowly pulled the stool out and sat down. The wood made a soft creaking sound beneath her. She sat straight, placing her feet lightly on the floor. She ran her fingers gently across the keys without pressing them yet. Her breathing steadied. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the sound of another piano in another place. From a life that felt far away now, she could hear the whispered laughter still coming from the teenagers. But it didn't reach her the way it did before. When she placed her fingers on the keys this time, she wasn't thinking about the people watching her. She wasn't thinking about the cold outside or the hunger in her stomach. She was thinking about the music. The first soft note rang out when she pressed down on the key. It wasn't perfect, slightly out of tune, but she didn't mind. She rested her hands above the keys, ready to begin. The cafe was quiet enough, now that even the small sounds from the piano seemed louder. She inhaled slowly. Then she began to play. Her fingers moved gently at first, as if warming up the old instrument. A few people leaned forward in their seats. The laughter from earlier faded as the melody started to form. She played a simple sequence, but the notes connected smoothly. Her hands moved with ease, with familiarity, as if they had spent a lifetime learning these motions. The customers watched her, expecting the music to fall apart at any second. But it didn't. The girl opened her eyes slightly, looking at the keys as her fingers glided over them. She didn't smile, but there was a softness in her expression now, a quiet peace she rarely felt anywhere else. People began to whisper, not mocking this time, but curious. "Wait. She actually knows what she's doing," someone murmured. "Is she really playing like that?" Another asked. The owner stood behind the counter, frozen with a cloth still in his hand. He hadn't expected this. Not at all. The girl continued her soft melody, unaware that more and more people were turning to watch. Something gentle and warm filled the room, contrast to the cold air waiting outside. She played as if the music belonged to her, as if she had been born with it. No one laughed anymore. No one even whispered. Every eye in the cafe was on the thin, hungry girl at the dusty piano, and she was only just beginning. The soft melody from the girl's hands continued to float through the cafe, and the room grew even quieter as more people noticed what was happening. At first, only a few customers were watching her, but soon almost everyone had turned their heads toward the dusty piano in the corner. The notes she played were gentle, almost fragile, yet they carried across the room clearly, like a small voice speaking in a silent space. The teenagers near the door stopped whispering. A moment before, they had been smirking and nudging each other, waiting for her to embarrass herself. Now they sat still, eyebrows raised, their earlier amusement replaced with surprise. One of them leaned slightly forward as if unsure whether what he was hearing was real. A woman who had been typing on her laptop slowly closed it, without taking her eyes off the girl. She rested her chin on her hand, listening carefully. The man sitting across from her, who had been busy reading the newspaper, lowered the pages bit by bit until his face was fully visible. Eyes locked on the piano, the girl kept playing, unaware of every stare. Her focus was on the keys alone. She knew this old piano wasn't perfect. Some notes were faint. Some were too sharp. She could feel its unevenness, but she didn't let any of that stop her. She shaped her music around the flaws, bending the melody to fit what the instrument could offer. Her hands began to move faster, building the tune into something richer. The notes rose and fell like waves, soft one moment and brighter the next. She had played these kinds of melodies before, in a different place, a different life, and she carried every memory in the way her fingers touched the keys. The owner of the cafe stood behind the counter, not even pretending to work anymore. He leaned slightly forward, elbows resting on the countertop, eyes fixed on the girl. He had expected nothing more than random noise. Instead, he felt something stirring inside him, something he couldn't fully explain. He wasn't a musician, but even he could tell she knew exactly what she was doing. A couple sitting close to the piano exchanged a look of disbelief. The woman whispered, "She's really good." Her partner nodded, his expression softening as he watched the girl's small, delicate hands glide across the keys. The girl didn't see any of this. She didn't need to. She didn't play for the people. She didn't even play for the food she hoped to earn. She played because music was the only thing that still made her feel whole. Every note she pressed reminded her of warmth, of gentler days, of moments she wished she could hold on to. For a few minutes, the cold outside didn't matter. The hunger didn't matter. The world didn't feel as heavy. She switched to a slower tune, letting the melody drift softly. The cafe felt different now, almost dreamlike. A little child who had been coloring at a table nearby stood on his chair to get a better look at her. His mother gently placed a hand on his shoulder to steady him, though she didn't stop him from watching Dot as the girl continued playing. The door to the cafe opened, letting in a blast of cold wind. A man stepped inside, brushing snow off his shoulders. He took one step forward, then froze when he heard the music. His eyes traveled across the room until he found the girl at the piano. He stood there silently, holding the door for a moment too long before letting it close behind him. The girl kept her focus steady. Her fingers moved with a natural rhythm, each note flowing into the next. Her melody was simple, but filled with emotion. She didn't need complicated pieces to touch the room. The honesty in her playing did that on its own. One of the teenagers shifted uncomfortably and said in a low voice, "I didn't think she could actually play." His friend shrugged, but didn't take his eyes off the piano. None of them made jokes anymore. The owner finally stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. He walked a few steps closer, as if drawn by the music. He didn't want to disturb her, but he wanted to hear better. The melody reminded him of something, maybe a song he had heard long ago, or maybe a feeling he once had and forgot about. A man at the back, who had been working on a sketch in his notebook, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. He hesitated for a moment, then began recording. He wasn't trying to be rude. He simply felt that something special was happening, and he didn't want the moment to disappear forever. The girl didn't notice the phone. She didn't notice the growing crowd around her either. She was lost in the soft rise and fall of her tune. Her small shoulders relaxed as she played, and her eyes remained half closed. For a moment, she looked completely different, not like a hungry girl in an oversized jacket, but like someone who belonged on a stage, someone who carried music inside her. Then, slowly, she let the last notes fade away. Her fingers rested on the keys a moment longer before she finally lifted them. She took a quiet breath and looked up. Silence filled the room. Not the uncomfortable kind, not the awkward kind, just a deep, warm stillness. Then the silence broke. It began with one pair of hands. The woman near the piano started clapping softly. Then another customer joined. Soon, the entire cafe was filled with applause, growing louder and warmer with each passing second. The girl blinked, confused at first. She hadn't expected this. She had thought maybe someone would tell her to stop. She didn't think anyone would listen to her at all. But they weren't just listening, they were moved. The owner stepped a little closer and gave her a small smile. "You really can play," he said gently. His voice carried a mix of surprise and admiration. The girl lowered her head slightly, unsure what to say. "Thank you," she whispered. A few customers began murmuring among themselves, amazed at what they had heard. "Where did she learn?" Someone asked. "She's so young," another said. "Did she say she wanted food? Should we help her?" A woman near the back whispered to her friend. But the girl didn't hear those conversations clearly. Her heart was still pounding from the music, from the attention, from the unexpected applause. The owner motioned for her to follow him to the counter. "Come on," he said softly. "I believe we made a deal." She stood up slowly, pushing the stool back with a quiet scrape. As she walked through the room, people stepped aside to make space for her. No one laughed this time. No one mocked her. Instead, they watched her with gentle eyes, as if they had suddenly learned something important about her. When she reached the counter, the owner reached for a bowl behind him. Steam rose from it, carrying the smell of fresh vegetables and warm broth. He placed it on the counter carefully. "This is for you," he said. The girl stared at the bowl, her eyes widening just slightly. She hadn't expected something warm, something real, something good. She looked up at the owner, her voice low and shy. "Thank you." "Truly," he nodded. "You earned it." She held the bowl gently, almost afraid she might drop it. The warmth seeped into her hands, comforting her in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. As she took her first spoonful, the sound of new conversations filled the cafe again. But the tone was different now. The people weren't ignoring her. They weren't laughing. They were talking about her music, her skill, her courage. More customers walked up to the counter, asking the owner questions. "Who is she? Does she come here often? Do you think she has a place to stay?" He didn't have answers, but he kept glancing at the girl, wondering about her story. Meanwhile, she ate quietly, trying to stay unnoticed again. The warmth of the food spread through her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. But even as she sat there, grateful and calm, she didn't realize something important. Her life had just changed, and everyone in that cafe had felt the moment it happened. Part 3. The girl sat at a small table near the counter, her hands wrapped around the warm bowl the owner had given her. She took slow spoonfuls of the soup, savoring each one. It wasn't just the warmth or the taste, it was the feeling of finally eating something comforting after such a long time. She kept her head down as she ate, though she could feel the eyes of some customers still drifting toward her now and then. People weren't staring the same way they had earlier. Before, their looks had held doubt, amusement, even disbelief. Now, their expressions showed curiosity, respect, and something gentler, something like concern. The owner remained behind the counter for a while, pretending to organize things, but really, he was watching her. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable, so he tried to act natural. Still, he kept glancing over, wondering what had brought her here. She didn't look like someone who had just wandered in out of boredom. There was a quiet heaviness about her, something that didn't match her young age. "You think she's alone?" A customer whispered near the pastry case. I don't know, another replied. She looks like she's been outside for a while. The girl didn't catch the words, but she heard the soft tones, the gentle shift in the room's energy. It felt strange. She wasn't used to people paying attention to her, at least not in a kind way. After finishing half the bowl of soup, she placed the spoon down and took a small breath. The warmth inside her was comforting, but she still felt shy, as if she didn't fully belong in this quiet, cozy place. She glanced over at the piano again. The keys were still slightly dusty where she hadn't touched them. A few customers were still looking that way, almost expecting her to return. She didn't blame them. Music had always had a way of making people want more. The owner finally took a step out from behind the counter and walked toward her. She noticed him and quickly straightened in her seat, unsure if she had done something wrong. He stopped a short distance away and gave her a small, warm smile. "You play very well," he said kindly. She lowered her eyes for a moment. Compliments weren't something she received often. "Thank you," she murmured. "Where did you learn?" He asked. She hesitated, unsure how much to share. The truth was hard to speak out loud. She took a breath and said softly, "At home." "Before?" The owner nodded slowly, not pushing for more. He could tell there was a story behind her answer, but he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said gently, reading her silence. "I just wanted to say you're very talented." She nodded again, grateful for his understanding. "Would you like more food?" He offered. Her eyes widened a little, but she shook her head. "No, this is enough." "Thank you so much." He didn't argue. Instead, he rested his hands in his pockets and looked toward the piano. "You know, that thing hasn't sounded that beautiful in years. I almost forgot it was even there." She allowed a tiny smile to appear small. Quiet, but genuine. A few customers approached her table now. Not too close, but just enough to show their admiration. "That was amazing," a man said. "I've never heard anything like that here." "You should keep playing," a woman added softly. "You really have a gift." The girl felt a warm flush rise to her cheeks. She wasn't used to hearing such kind words. She nodded politely, unsure what else to say. After a few moments, the customers returned to their seats, still talking quietly about her performance. The owner gave one last gentle smile before returning to his place behind the counter. The girl continued eating, though her mind was drifting now. She thought about the piano, about her music, about her mother. She wondered what her mother would think if she could see her sitting here, surrounded by people who had just listened to her play. Once she finished the soup, she placed the spoon neatly in the bowl and folded her hands in her lap. She didn't want to take up space for too long. She knew she couldn't stay forever, even if the cafe felt warm and safe. She looked down at her jacket, noticing a loose thread near the sleeve. She picked at it absent-mindedly, her thoughts wandering. She had been alone for a while, moving from place to place, finding quiet corners to sleep in when night came. Some nights felt longer than others. Some nights she pretended to hear her mother's voice, telling her to be brave. Her mother had taught her the piano, not with strict lessons, not with pressure, but with gentle guidance. She remembered sitting beside her mother on a wooden bench, their shoulders touching. Her mother's hands had always been warm, steady, and patient. Even now, when the girl played, she imagined those same hands guiding her own. The girl didn't realize how long she had been lost in her thoughts until she heard someone call softly, "Excuse me?" She looked up and saw a woman standing near her table. She was holding a notebook and wearing a soft, friendly smile. "I hope I'm not bothering you," the woman said. "I just wanted to ask if you have a place where you play often." The girl hesitated. "No, I don't really have a place." The woman nodded thoughtfully. You're very talented. I think people should hear you play more." The girl didn't know how to respond. She simply gave a small nod. The woman left her card on the table. "If you ever need help, or if you want someone to hear you play again, feel free to reach out." The girl didn't touch the card right away. She wasn't sure what to do with it. Opportunities weren't something she was used to. As more customers finished their meals and began to leave, several of them smiled or nodded at her on their way out. Each gesture felt warm, almost unreal. The owner walked over again once the cafe became a little quieter. "You know," he said, leaning on the edge of her table, "if you'd like to play again sometime, you're welcome to." She blinked, surprised. "Really?" "Of course," he said. "You brought a little magic into this place today." The girl looked down at her hands, hiding the shy smile that tugged at her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to go right away," he said gently. "Stay as long as you want. Warm up a little." She nodded. "Okay." But even as she sat there, comfort settling around her like a soft blanket, she felt the pull of the world outside. She knew she couldn't stay forever. Places like this weren't meant for her, not yet, at least. Still, she let herself rest for a little while longer. Her stomach was warm, her hands steady, and her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Eventually, she stood up and carried the empty bowl to the counter. The owner looked up at her and smiled. "Thank you again," she said quietly. "No," he replied, shaking his head with a soft grin. "Thank you." She placed the bowl on the counter and glanced toward the door. Her jacket looked even thinner once she walked away from the warm air of the cafe, but she zipped it up as best she could. Before leaving, she gave one last look back at the piano. It sat in the corner, dusty and old, but now it held a new memory, one she would carry with her. She pushed open the door, and the cold air rushed around her again. Snowflakes drifted down slowly, rushing against her cheeks. She stepped onto the street, taking a deep breath. As she walked away from the cafe, she didn't notice the man with the sketchbook watching her through the window. He had captured her in a drawing, a small figure with delicate hands hovering. Above a dusty piano. He closed his notebook gently. Knowing he had witnessed something special, the girl continued down the street, her footsteps soft in the snow. She didn't know what waited for her next. She didn't know that her music had touched so many people. She didn't know her story was already beginning to spread. All she knew was that she had played. And for the first time in a long while, she had felt seen. Snowflakes continued falling lightly from the gray sky as the girl walked down the quiet street, her thin jacket wrapped tightly around her small frame. The warmth from the cafe still lingered in her chest, but it slowly faded with each step she took away from the glowing windows and the sound of soft conversations inside. She didn't know where to go next, but she had become used to that feeling, the feeling of moving without a clear direction. Her shoes left small prints in the snow, the steps gentle and careful. She looked around at the snowy sidewalks, the dim streetlights, the closed shop fronts, and the quiet roads that stretched ahead of her. Everything seemed calm, slower than usual, as if the whole town was wrapped in silence. The girl tucked her cold hands into her pockets and kept walking. She replayed the moment at the piano in her mind. The way the room had gone quiet, the way the melody had flowed so naturally, and the way people had stared at her, not with judgment this time, but with something that felt warm and surprising. She remembered the applause, the way it had filled the room, the kind smiles directed her way. She remembered the owner's gentle words, the warm bowl of food, and the woman who had left the card on the table. She wondered what her mother would have said if she were still here. Her mother had always believed in her music. She used to say, "When you play, you speak without needing words." The girl had never really understood it back then. She only knew she loved the sound of the piano. the way it made her feel calm and whole. Now, as she walked through the cold, she understood her mother's words a little more. Up ahead, she saw a small park with benches covered in snow. She walked toward it and brushed one of the benches with her sleeve, clearing a small space before sitting down. She sat quietly, her breath forming little clouds in the air as she watched them disappear. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if they were still touching the piano keys. She placed her hands in her lap and rubbed them gently to keep them warm. The girl closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of passing cars and the wind moving through the bare trees. She didn't stay long. The cold was getting sharper, and she knew she needed to keep moving. She stood and began walking again, turning the woman's card over in her pocket. She had taken it before leaving the cafe, even though she didn't know what to do with it. Asking for help wasn't something she felt comfortable doing. She never wanted to be a burden to anyone, but the woman's kind eyes kept appearing in her thoughts as she walked back toward the main street. She didn't notice that someone was following her from a distance, the man with the sketchbook. He kept a respectful space between them, not wanting to frighten her. He walked slowly, matching her pace from across the street, making sure she didn't sense him. He wasn't following her out of concern or suspicion. He was curious, moved by what he had witnessed at the cafe. He had been drawing people for years, sketching strangers he found interesting, capturing small moments that most people overlooked. But the girl, the thin, quiet child with a talent far bigger than she realized, had touched him deeply. He wasn't sure why, but something about her stirred a feeling in him that he couldn't shake. He watched as she continued down the street, turning corners, sometimes stopping to warm her hands by a shop window's soft glow. She walked like someone who carried invisible weight, someone used to moving alone. After a few minutes, he decided to turn back. He didn't want to intrude on her life. The sketchbook was enough for now, a soft reminder of the moment he had witnessed. Meanwhile, the girl kept walking until she reached a quiet bridge that overlooked a frozen river. She leaned against the railing, staring at the smooth white surface. Snowflakes landed gently on her hair and jacket. The world around her felt both enormous and silent. She knew night was approaching quickly. She needed a place to stay, even if it was only a sheltered corner or a quiet space behind a building where the wind couldn't reach her. But before she could move again, she heard a small voice nearby. "Are you okay?" She turned her head slightly and saw a little boy standing beside his mother. They were both looking at her with gentle concern. The boy had a small toy car in his mittened hand, and his mother held a grocery bag. The girl nodded quietly. "I'm fine." "You look cold," the mother said softly. "I'm all right," the girl replied. The mother hesitated, then opened the grocery bag and took out a wrapped muffin. "Here," she said kindly. "It's fresh. You can have it." The girl blinked, surprised by the gesture. She didn't want to take advantage of anyone's kindness, but the mother's expression was so warm that refusing felt wrong. "Thank you," she said in a small voice. The woman smiled. "Take care, all right?" The girl nodded and watched them walk away. The boy turned once to wave at her before trotting after his mother. She looked at the muffin in her hands. The paper wrapper crinkled softly against her fingers. She tucked it carefully into her jacket pocket, saving it for later. As she continued walking, the sky grew darker. She found a small alleyway behind a row of shops, sheltered from wind but still cold. She sat down against the wall and curled up as tightly as she could. She wasn't afraid of the night. She had faced it many times before, but tonight felt heavier. Maybe it was because she had experienced warmth for a little while and now felt the contrast more sharply. She closed her eyes and thought about the piano again. She replayed the melody she had played earlier, letting it echo softly in her mind. It was the only thing that made her feel safe. Hours passed slowly. The streets grew quieter. Now and then, she shivered and hugged her knees closer. She wished she had a blanket. She wished she had a home. But wishing didn't change anything. She had learned that long ago, at some point. Her breathing grew slower, and her thoughts became foggy. She drifted into a light sleep, the kind where every sound woke her again. While she slept, the cafe owner was closing up his shop. He swept the floors, wiped the counters, and stacked the chairs, but his mind was somewhere else. He kept thinking about the girl, her music, her quiet voice, her thin jacket. He wondered if she had somewhere safe to go. He wondered if she had anyone to look after her. As he locked the front door, he glanced down the street, half hoping to see her walking by again, maybe looking for a warm place. But the street was empty and still. He sighed, rubbing his hands together for warmth. I should have asked her more, he muttered to himself. I should have checked if she needed help. He stood there for a moment, watching the snow fall. A part of him hoped she would come back tomorrow. He wanted to make sure she was okay. The next morning, the girl woke to the sound of footsteps and the faint noise of shop doors opening. She stretched her cold limbs slowly, standing up and brushing snow from her clothes. Her neck was stiff and her fingers numb, but she didn't complain. She simply began walking again. She returned to the main street. Her stomach was empty again, but she still had the muffin the woman had given her. She ate it slowly while walking, letting each bite warm her a little more. When she approached the cafe, she stopped. She wasn't sure if she should go in again. She didn't want the owner to think she was taking advantage of his kindness. But then she saw him through the window. He was rearranging tables, humming quietly to himself. He looked calmer today, more relaxed. She hesitated, then gently pushed the door open. The owner looked up immediately, surprise lighting his face. Hey, he said with a smile. You're back. She nodded quietly. Come in, warm up, he said, waving her inside. She stepped in, letting the warm air wash over her. The cafe wasn't busy yet, just a few early customers having their morning coffee. The owner stepped closer. How are you feeling? I'm okay, she said. He studied her for a moment, noticing the dark circles under her eyes and the stiffness in her movements. Did you sleep well? She nodded, though it wasn't really true. He didn't push. Instead, he looked toward the piano. You're welcome to play again any time, he said softly. The girl's eyes followed his gaze. For a moment, she simply stared at the piano. Then she looked back at the owner. Can I play now? She asked quietly. Of course, he said. She walked toward the piano, her steps slow but sure. As she sat down again, she placed her hands carefully on the keys. The room grew quieter. The customers turned slightly in their seats, recognizing her. Then, with a deep breath, she let her fingers touch the keys. The first note rang out, soft, shaky, but full of something real. And once again, the room began to fall silent. No one knew it yet. But this moment, this second performance, would change everything. For her, and for everyone who would soon hear her story. The moment the girl touched the piano keys that morning, something felt different inside the cafe. The air seemed to grow warmer, softer, as if every sound paused to make room for the music about to flow from her small hands. She took a quiet breath and let her fingers glide gently across the keys. Starting with a slow melody she remembered her mother humming years ago. It was one of the few songs she carried with her everywhere. Like a tiny piece of home she refused to let fade. At first, her hands trembled a little because she hadn't slept well. But once the melody began to take shape, her fingers steadied. Her shoulders relaxed. Her eyes softened. It was as if the music wrapped itself around her, giving her comfort she couldn't find anywhere else. The cafe owner stood behind the counter, watching her carefully. It amazed him how someone so young could play with such emotion, as if she had lived a lifetime full of stories most people never heard. Other customers turned their heads slowly, coffee cups held mid-air, surprised to hear such a graceful sound so early in the morning. One couple by the window whispered to each other, wondering who she was. A taxi driver sipping tea near the door set his cup down and leaned forward. Even a young woman typing on her laptop lifted her eyes from the screen, her expression softening as she listened. The girl didn't notice any of them. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She was playing because it was the only way she knew how to speak, the only way she could let out all the feelings she kept hidden in her heart. For a moment, the cafe felt like another world, warm, peaceful, untouched by the cold snow outside. When she finished the song, the last note faded slowly into silence. No one moved. No one even breathed for a moment. Then, the room filled with gentle applause, the kind that wasn't loud or forced, but full of appreciation. The girl lowered her hands from the keys and looked down, shy and unsure of how to react. That was beautiful, the cafe owner said quietly from behind her. She turned her head slightly and nodded. Not knowing what to say, "Are you hungry?" he asked. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded again, just a little. He smiled warmly and walked toward the kitchen. "I'll bring you something. Sit wherever you like." She stood up slowly from the piano bench and walked to a corner table near the window. She didn't want to draw too much attention to herself. The warmth of the cafe made her feel safe, but she still felt nervous, unsure of how long she could stay. As she sat, she noticed a few customers smiling at her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a gentle, kind way, as if they were quietly cheering for her. The cafe owner soon brought her a warm plate of food. "Eat," he said softly. "You need it." She whispered a small, "Thank you," before picking up the fork. Each bite felt like a blessing, warming her empty stomach and bringing a sense of relief she rarely felt. While she ate, the door gently opened, and the man with the sketchbook from the day before stepped inside. The owner greeted him with a nod, but the girl didn't notice him at first, because she was focused on her food. The man looked around until he saw her sitting quietly near the window. His eyes softened. He walked to a chair across the room, not wanting to sit too close, and opened his sketchbook. He flipped through the pages until he found the drawing he had made of her, the one where she played the piano the first time. Then he slowly began adding more lines, more details, capturing the new warmth on her face, the way she seemed both strong and fragile. After a few minutes, the girl finished eating and wiped her hands on the napkin. She looked toward the piano again. Something inside her wanted to play more. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel afraid of wanting something. The cafe owner walked back to her table. "You can play any time," he said with a small smile. She nodded quietly. "Can I play one more?" she asked. "Of course." She walked back to the piano and sat down, feeling a little more confident than before. This time, she chose a melody she had created herself during a moment of loneliness weeks ago. She wanted to give the cafe something of her own, not something she remembered, but something she felt. As she played, the man with the sketchbook looked up, his pencil pausing mid-line. He had never heard anything like it. The melody was simple, but it carried so much emotion that it made his chest tighten. A soft hush fell over the cafe once again. The girl played slowly, letting the notes rise and fall like waves. Her eyes were half closed, as if she were drifting somewhere far away, yet safe. Each chord carried pieces of her story, her loss, her hope, her longing. When she reached the final note, she let her hands rest on the keys for a moment before pulling them away. She didn't expect applause this time, but it came anyway. Quiet, warm, honest. The cafe owner stepped closer to her. "You're really talented," he said softly. "Have you ever taken lessons?" She shook her head. He exhaled slowly. "You should be learning from someone. You have something special." The girl didn't know how to respond. Everyone said such phrases to children who could draw or sing, but the owner's voice sounded different, sincere, as if he truly believed it. Before she could speak, the cafe door opened again. This time, the woman who had given her the card entered. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and she carried a small folder in her hand. When she saw the girl at the piano, her face lit up. "You came back," she said warmly. The girl nodded quietly. The woman walked closer. "I'm really glad. I've been thinking about you." The girl looked down shyly. The cafe owner approached the woman. "You know her?" "I met her yesterday," the woman said. "I heard her play, and I wanted to help if she was willing." The girl shifted nervously on the bench. The woman gently kneeled beside her. "I don't want to scare you," she said softly. "I just want you to know that I work with young musicians. And when I heard you play, I knew you needed to be heard by more people. I'm not here to force you into anything. I only want to open doors for you, if you want them open." The girl didn't speak for a long moment. Her fingers brushed lightly over the keys, as if seeking comfort. The woman continued, "Would you like to visit the music center?" "Just to look. You don't have to decide anything now." The girl took a slow breath. The idea scared her. She wasn't used to people offering help. Usually, people walked past her without noticing her at all. She didn't know if she could trust this woman. She didn't know if she belonged in a place like a music center, but she remembered the warm applause, the kind smiles, the feeling she had while playing. She remembered her mother's words. "Music will guide you," her mother once said. She lifted her eyes slowly and nodded. The woman smiled gently, relief washing over her face. "Good," she said softly. "I'll pick you up tomorrow morning. You don't have to bring anything. Just come as you are." The cafe owner placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You'll be great," he said with quiet confidence. The man with the sketchbook watched from a distance, his heart warming as he sketched the moment. The girl felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a tiny spark of hope. After the woman left, the cafe owner gave the girl a warm drink and let her sit by the window for as long as she wanted. She watched snow fall outside, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. The world felt suddenly bigger. As evening approached, the cafe owner gently asked, "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" The girl hesitated. She didn't want to worry him, but she also didn't want to lie. "I'm okay," she said softly. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "But remember, you're welcome here anytime." She gave a small nod of gratitude. Later, she stepped outside, feeling the cold air kiss her skin again. The world seemed quieter than the night before, as if holding its breath for what was to come. She found a small sheltered spot near a bookstore's back door and settled there for the night. It wasn't warm, but the memory of the cafe's kindness kept her heart steady. She clutched the woman's card in her hand, reading the name again and again. Something about it felt safe. The girl looked up at the sky, watching snowflakes float down like tiny stars. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, her life might begin to change, and for the first time in a long while, she felt ready for it. The morning arrived softly, with a pale light stretching across the quiet streets. Snow lay like a thin blanket over the ground, untouched and peaceful. The girl woke slowly, brushing flakes from her hair as she sat up, feeling the stiffness in her back from sleeping on the cold ground. Yet today felt different. Something hopeful tugged gently inside her chest. She stood and rubbed her hands together for warmth. Her breath formed small clouds in the air as she stepped out from her sheltered corner behind the bookstore. She held the woman's card carefully, reading the name one more time before slipping it back into her pocket. The world around her was still waking. Up, shop signs flickering on, delivery trucks rolling down the road, the faint smell of freshly baked bread drifting from a nearby bakery. For the first time in a long while, the girl felt a quiet excitement building inside her, even though she tried to hide it. She reminded herself to stay calm, to take things slowly. She walked toward the cafe, just as she had done the day before. The familiar warm glow from inside made something inside her chest relax. When she pushed open the door, the cafe owner looked up immediately and smiled. "Good morning," he said warmly. She nodded softly. "Morning." He noticed the way her eyes carried a small spark today, different from the tentative look she had when she first walked into his cafe days earlier. "You ready for your big day?" he asked. "I think so," she whispered. He placed a warm cup of tea in front of her and set down a small plate with toast. "Eat first," he said. "It's important." She nodded gratefully and sat at her usual spot. As she ate, she noticed the man with the sketchbook sitting at a distant table. He lifted his eyes briefly, offering her a gentle smile before returning to his drawing. She wondered what he was always sketching, but she didn't ask. She didn't want to bother him. After a few minutes, the cafe door opened again. The woman entered, brushing snow from her coat. When she spotted the girl, her face lit up. "There you are," she said softly as she walked over. "Are you ready?" The girl nodded, feeling her heartbeat quicken. The cafe owner stepped forward. "Take good care of her," he said to the woman. "I will," the woman replied with a reassuring smile. The girl stood, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. She looked back at the cafe owner, who gave her a gentle nod. "You'll do great," he said quietly. She followed the woman outside. The cold air greeted them instantly, but the woman held her jacket close and guided her toward a nearby car. "Don't worry," the woman said softly as she unlocked the door. "You're safe with me." The girl hesitated only for a moment before climbing into the car. The seat felt soft beneath her, much more comfortable than anything she was used to. As they drove, the girl stared out the window, watching the snowy streets pass by. She didn't know where the music center was or what it looked like. She didn't know what people there would think of her. A part of her felt nervous, afraid of being judged, afraid of looking out of place. "You did something very brave by agreeing to come," the woman said gently. "Trying something new is never easy." The girl nodded quietly. The woman continued, "I want you to know something. What I felt when I heard you play. It wasn't just talent. It was something deeper. Some musicians play the right notes, but you play from the heart. That's rare." The girl lowered her eyes, unsure of how to respond. After a short drive, they arrived at a large building with wide glass windows and a tall sign above the entrance. Inside, soft music drifted through the hall. The girl followed the woman inside, her small steps echoing faintly against the polished floor. The music center was bright and warm, filled with people carrying instruments, chatting quietly or practicing in small rooms. The girl felt overwhelmed at first. She wasn't used to places filled with noise and energy. The woman noticed her nervousness. She gently rested a hand on the girl's shoulder. "It's all right," she said. "You're not here to impress anyone. Just be yourself." They walked down a hallway lined with framed photographs of young musicians. Some photos showed competitions, others performances, and some captured smiling faces holding certificates. The girl stared at them as she walked, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and fear. The woman opened a door to a small room with a piano inside. The room was warm and well lit, with soft chairs and shelves filled with sheet music. "This is just a private room," the woman explained. "No audience." No pressure. I want to hear you play again, just like before. Anything you want." The girl stepped forward slowly. Her eyes landed on the piano, a beautiful instrument with smooth black and white keys. It looked even nicer than the cafe piano. She approached the bench and sat down carefully. The woman stood nearby, her hands folded gently in front of her. "Take your time," she said softly. The girl took a quiet breath. She placed her fingers lightly on the keys, letting the familiar feeling spread through her. The world around her faded, replaced by the steady comfort of music. She started with the same melody she had played at the cafe the second morning, the one she had created herself. The sound filled the room gently, warm and rich. The woman listened closely, her expression softening with every note. Then the girl played another melody, one her mother had taught her long ago. The room seemed to hold its breath, the piano echoing gently against the walls. For a while, the girl forgot where she was. She forgot her fears, her exhaustion, her hunger. She forgot the cold nights and lonely streets. All she felt was the music. When she finished, the room fell silent. The woman blinked slowly, wiping a single tear from the corner of her eye. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "Truly beautiful." The girl lowered her hands, unsure of what to say. The woman stepped closer. "I want to help you," she said softly. "I want to make sure you can learn properly, safely, and grow your gift." The girl looked up at her, confusion filling her eyes. The woman continued gently, "But before anything, I need to ask, do you have someone who takes care of you?" The girl's lips parted, but no words came out. "You don't have to tell me everything," the woman said quickly, not wanting to scare her. "I just want to know if you're safe." The girl looked down at her hands. After a long moment, she shook her head quietly. The woman's heart softened. She knelt beside the girl. "Thank you for trusting me," she said quietly. "You're not alone anymore, all right?" The girl blinked slowly. She wasn't used to hearing such words. The woman stood and took a calm breath. "I'm going to speak with a social worker I know," she said gently. "Someone kind, someone who will listen. We'll take this step by step. No one will force you into anything. You'll have a say in everything." The girl nodded slowly. It was all new to her, but something in the woman's voice made her feel safe. After a moment, the woman smiled. "Before we do anything else, would you like to meet some of the teachers here?" The girl hesitated, but then nodded softly. The woman opened the door and led her down the hallway. They visited a few practice rooms where teachers greeted her warmly. They listened as the woman explained how the girl played at the cafe and how she had a natural gift. Some teachers smiled politely, not fully understanding, until the woman asked the girl to play a short piece. And when she did, their eyes widened, their faces changed. They listened with full attention, moved by the emotion in her playing. "Remarkable," one whispered. "Incredible control for someone who's never had lessons." Another murmured. The girl felt shy, but also a little proud. For once, people weren't looking at her with pity or confusion. They were looking at her with respect. After the tour, the woman took her back to the main entrance. "I'll bring you back tomorrow," she said softly. "We'll talk more then. For today, just know that you're welcome here." The girl felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. When they stepped outside, the woman offered her a warm coat from the car. "It's faux,"